Team News. This is breaking news.
Good afternoon. We have learned the names of the victims of that double homicide in Middleton yesterday. Close friends and family confirm with WMTV State Patrol Bureau Director David Pabst and his wife Teresa, known as Terry, were found dead in their home. WMTV's Tabitha Bland joins us now. Tabitha, what's the latest that you're learning about the victims?
Lee, David was the director of the Wisconsin State Patrol Bureau of Transportation Safety. A call came in yesterday afternoon that the two were found dead in their home. We then found out that the suspect took his own life after a traffic pursuit in Vernon County. That's almost 2 hours from Dane County. The Vernon County Sheriff says that he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and no officers on the scene fired their weapons. Like I mentioned, I talked with the Vernon County Sheriff about an hour ago, who says the suspect's autopsy was completed this morning. His name will not be released, though, until the Dane County Medical Examiner officially releases the name of those two victims. Live in the studio, Tabitha Bland, WMTV 15 News.